A long, long time ago, when I was a newly minted rabbi, the way we prayed in a Reformed service, as many of you can remember, was really, really different from what we're doing here. The guiding principle, which I hadn't thought about in a while, of Reformed Jewish worship seemed to be the word decorum. If you forget the word decorum, it means behavior in keeping with good taste and propriety. Being decorous was expressed with our clothing, which would always be somewhat formal, our language, almost entirely in a very fine English, very, very little Hebrew. Musical instruments, only the organ and the human voice. Our expressions of emotion would be kept to a minimum, except, of course, for the occasional righteous indignation, and I suppose every once in a while a little hellfire and brimstone. Spirituality, believe it or not, was thought to be not very decorous. Spirituality, I guess, was thought of as it could be messy, it could be emotional, it could be uncomfortable, it could be unpredictable. As a matter of fact, when I went to the Hebrew Union College for my interview for rabbinical school in 1978, I was strongly advised, don't use the word spiritual. It could make the committee very uncomfortable. They might think you're some type of meditating hippie or something. I was early on chastised for wearing brown shoes on the bima. We were warned against osculation on the bima, and I went into my study to look up the word osculation. And it means, a little tiny Shabbat Shalom type kiss. Not tolerated were the sounds of young children, the sight of an open collar, meaning no tie, guitar, facial hair, etc. It was a very, very different world. And we've come a long way. We've come so far that last Friday night at services, I happened to be wearing a tie and suit, and more than one person came up to me and said, "Why are you so dressed up? What's the occasion?" And I said, "Shabbat? I don't. There's much less focus on what we wear than what we say and what we do, and how glorious our music has grown and evolved in so many ways. We also back then didn't talk about God all that much, even from the bima, sometimes especially from the bima. God was mentioned frequently in the prayers, but there was not a lot of talk about God, about belief. So I want you to take this as a compliment, because it's meant as one. You Jews today are much harder to please with prayer and worship than the Jews of some recent generations. And that's a good thing, and it's truly a compliment. Much was left unquestioned in the decades past. People expected the music they'd always heard to be the music of the moment. People recited prayers more out of habit, without much focus on their meaning. But today, so many of our people of all ages want to understand. They want to know what's going on. They want to know the fabric. They want to know what's underneath the words, and where did the music come from, and why this particular music, and what is God expecting of us. We don't want to participate in ceremonies or services that we don't understand. We want the words that we say to be authentic and to ring true. And these changes are wonderful, and they go way beyond the sanctuary. Weddings, I must tell you, are very different now than they used to be for me. What people look for in a ceremony has changed dramatically. Most couples who came into my office in the 80s or 90s, they all said the exact same thing when they walked in, thinking it was, I suppose, a nice, polite thing to say. They said, "Rabbi, if you could not use too much Hebrew, Rabbi, please don't say too much that's very Jewish, and if you could keep it really short." Like, everybody came in with the same requests. But it's very different today. Couples come in now with an incredible curiosity about each little part of the ceremony, sometimes wanting to revive old traditions, sometimes wanting to create new ones. And people want to be very careful with God language in their weddings. A lot of thought is put into only saying things that someone can say with authenticity, words that they actually believe. By the way, one thing hasn't changed. Everyone still wants the ceremony to be pretty short. No one's ever come to me ever and said, "Rabbi, if you could just make the ceremony at our wedding really long." That's never happened. But folks as young as 11 and 12-year-olds can be wonderfully demanding too, and wanting to understand this praying stuff and this God stuff. It used to be more rare for a bar bat mitzvah kid to think very deeply about God and about the prayers that they were saying at the day of, at the celebration of becoming bar bat mitzvah. And now a good number of our young kids have serious and brilliant questions. More than a few times, Shira, David, and I will get a call from a parent who's actually a little bit embarrassed. They'll say that because their son or daughter isn't sure they want to have a bar bat mitzvah because they don't believe in all the prayers, they don't believe in God. I have to ask you, don't be embarrassed or feel awkward to tell the rabbi or the cantor that your kid is not sure that he or she believes in God, because that's a really cool kid. Our response is, good for you, good for your kid. Most of us don't think about these things, about prayer and God, until well into adulthood. So if you're lucky enough to have one of those kids who's curious and asking hard questions, and might even be a bit strident in doing so, then mazel tov, because you have a thinking, caring soul on your hands, and we look forward to engaging with them in good discussion and learning from them. Many of our 15-year-olds have deep and serious questions as well. Every year, when we prepare for the confirmation service at Shavuot at the end of the year, our 10th graders in preparation are given a sheet of sentence completions that they fill out, just to help churn some of the ideas for the service and to present. There are things like, the place I feel most comfortable is. When I grow up, I would like to. If I could change one thing in the world, it would be. My favorite Kol Ami memory is. I admit I've used the same sheet pretty much for many years, but all of a sudden, a few years ago, one sentence completion became very contentious. A time I felt close to God was. Complete the sentence. It used to seem rather innocuous and kind of straightforward. But kids, in these last couple of years, they want to understand more. They found the sentence to be very presumptuous. A question that A, presumes that they believe in God, and B, presumes that there was a time when they felt close to God. That's a lot to ask of somebody, especially a 10th grader, in one little sentence. So kids are asking, wait, what if I never had a time that I felt close to God? What if I don't believe? Am I not a part of this? Am I supposed to step back? It's wonderful when they question. Because we're not in the business of telling people what to believe. Rather, our job is to try to present the tools, the spiritual vocabulary to engage in everyone's individual lifelong journey, wherever it takes them, most often to good places. So what's the modern Jew supposed to do? It's a great little morsel that may help. You look in different places, it may have been written a few centuries ago, but certainly it's helpful to us here and now with the hard God questions. The beautiful phrase, pray as if everything depends on God, and act as if everything depends on you. Pray as if it depends on God, and act as if it depends on you. Some places say it was St. Augustine. Some other places say it was the Reformed prayer book, Mishkan HaTefillah. I'll take either, because it's a wonderful, wonderful saying, whatever its source. You have the praying, and you have the doing, brought beautifully together. What are some of the things that we pray for when we gather? Most services. We have the prayer for healing, Misha Berach. We have a prayer for peace. We have the prayer to bring comfort to someone who recently had a death in their family. We have the prayer about feeding the homeless, clothing the naked. We have the Amidan, which we now fully embrace, the mothers of our tradition, equally with the fathers of our tradition. Pray as if everything depends on God, and act as if everything depends on you. It's wonderful. It doesn't say or. It doesn't say act or pray. It says pray and act. It's kind of like a redundant backup system. Think of yourself skydiving. Raise your hand if you've ever gone skydiving. A bunch of you. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You would never jump out of that plane unless you had both your parachute and your emergency chute. I'm not sure in this metaphor which of the chutes is God. I'll let you decide that on your own. So how do we Jews pray and act? The prayer is the Misha Berach. We sing the prayer for healing. The action when we visit the people who are ill, when we call them, when we check in on them, when we make them a bowl of soup. The prayer, Oseh Shalom, the one who creates peace, who makes peace. The action, anytime you've ever worked in your life to prevent war or protest or write a letter or supported a war that you thought might bring peace, or when you have meetings with elected officials, any of those things that you might do, the action. The prayer, to console the bereaved, the action when you show up for Shiva, when you give that hug. The prayer about feeding the homeless, clothing the naked, the action when we create and sustain a food pantry on our own property, as we've done, when we have bags in the atrium filled with food to take to someone who could use it, which we do, when we create a magnificent Thanksgiving dinner for the people from the coachman, which we do each and every year. The prayer, the Amidah, when we now fully embrace the mothers of our tradition along with the fathers of our tradition. So many possible actions, among them filling up buses to go to D.C. or New York or downtown White Plains to act for women's equality. So many ways. A beautiful example will be tomorrow morning when our kids across the way will be praying and acting as they did on Rosh Hashanah. They're going to be packing food for the homeless after they have a beautiful service of their own for the organization Feeding Westchester. Kolami is one of the largest contributors to that organization, helping them to gather, just from here, thousands of pounds of food. Our kids, just across the way, during the day on Yom Kippur, acting and praying. There's a singer who was brought to my attention by one of our 10th graders about a year ago, named Sam Smith. Wrote a beautiful song that captures the dilemma at the heart of these questions of action or prayer. Smith is a British fellow who's about 26 years old, and his first songs were very sweet love songs. But a couple of years ago, he traveled to Iraq with a charity called War Child, an organization that works to bring assistance to children living in war zones. He said, "I spent 5 days in Mosul and came back embarrassed that I had known so little about the world and other people's lives." In essence, he bemoaned the fact that he had not taken a chance to do any tikkun olam, that he'd not in any way been involved in fixing the world, just in some lovely love songs. And he was deeply conflicted about what to do, and with the song he jumps right into the center of these hard questions. When should I pray? Do I believe? How can I make things better? Where do I start? Are you there, God? I'm very confused. I'm going to read a few of the words from his song, and then I'll let you listen to the song itself to help you ask your own questions. I lift up my head and the world is on fire. There's dread in my heart and fear in my bones, and I just don't know what to say. Maybe I'll pray. I've never believed in you. No. But I'm going to pray. You won't find me in church reading a Bible, but I'm still here and I'm still your disciple. I'm down on my knees. I'm begging you, please. When I try to explain, the words run away. That's why I stood here today. And I'm going to pray, Lord. Maybe I'll pray. Pray for a glimmer of hope. Maybe I'll pray. Won't you call me? Can we have a one-to-one, please? Let's talk about freedom. Oh, and I'm going to pray. Pray for a glimmer of hope. Maybe I'll pray. I've never believed in you. Nope. But I'm going to pray.